To the program. Thanks very much for coming in. What do you expect to happen today?
I think probably the medium-term plan will be passed today, though it's very close. But even if it's passed today, that really just buys us a couple of months. So we can breathe a sigh of relief for the summer. But beyond that, there are big concerns. I mean, once it's passed, it needs to be implemented. And the opposition parties are against this plan. The Greek people are against this plan. Even senior members of the ruling party are against this plan. So I think the prospects for its implementation are actually very grim. And come September, when the EU, the ECB, and the IMF descend on Athens to assess Greece's progress on implementing this plan, they're going to have a really hard time justifying releasing more money to Greece.
Megan Green, it's interesting you say, the prospects are dim, but you have Olli Rehn, who is a senior official of the EU, saying there is no plan B. What do you make of that?
That's right. It's possible that there isn't a formalized plan B, but certainly everybody's thinking about what happens if Greece doesn't pass this plan today, because Greece would end up having to default without any more money. So either some countries would have to get it together to offer Greece bilateral loans to get it through at least July, or Greece would default, in which case, with a primary deficit, if it defaults, it either has to stop paying all of its public sector workers, which would spark massive social unrest, or it would have to leave the euro, reissue its own currency. Why
is that an option that many economists don't even want to talk about? The possibility of Greece leaving the euro, coming back with its own currency, devaluing, and starting all over again?
Leaving the euro would be extremely messy for Greece. It would be able to devalue its currency, so that's the one positive. But the negatives far outweigh that one positive. It would default on its sovereign debt. There would be a run on banks. It would default on its private debt. Capital controls would be imposed, which would be terrible for business. And moreover, Greece has really rigid labor and product markets, so it needs to restructure its economy. And if it leaves the euro, it still hasn't implemented all of those structural reforms. So its actual prospects for sustainable growth going forward aren't looking very good.
It's been a slow grind so far, but is there any evidence that the austerity measures that have been implemented so far have actually worked? Are there any results to show?
There are some results if you dig deep into statistics, which the Greek public really isn't doing. There is some proof that Greece has regained some of its competitiveness, but overall, the man on the street in Greece feels like their living standards have worsened since the beginning of this about a year ago.
Megan Green, thank you so much.
Leave the Eurozone, that's what she said yesterday in this interview to TF1. Back to you, Becky.
Okay, Stefan, thanks very much for that. Now, lots of people have their say on what should be top of the list of priorities for Christine Lagarde.
Δεν υπάρχει περίπτωση και τώρα η άνοδος θα κλείσει σε λίγα λεπτά. Ναι. Είναι τα ίδια ακριβώς μέτρα που είχαμε δει την περασμένη φορά.
Και θυμίζω ότι σήμερα είναι απεργία, Δημήτρη, γενική απεργία για ΣΕΑ, ΔΔ και ΔΕΚΟ και λοιπές δυνάμεις. Καταλαβαίνετε τώρα τι γίνεται από κυκλοφορία περιφερειακά. Μιλάμε το χάος.
Για περιμένετε, παιδιά, να δούμε εικόνα.
Για πες, Γιώργο.
Λοιπόν, είμαστε Χίλτον τώρα ακριβώς στον κόμβο.
Ναι.
Όπως βλέπετε, παραταγμένες περιμετρικά είναι οι δυνάμεις της αστυνομίας. Υπάρχει τροχονόμος και αυτοί φεύγουν μόνο αριστερά. Δεν περπατιέται η Βασιλέως.
Τους πάνε προς τα πάνω μόνο, προς Παγκράτη.
Αποσκάει, πάμε κάτω, πάμε κάτω. Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Λοιπόν, ομάδες όπως βλέπετε, κατεβαίνουμε τώρα την Βασιλέως Κωνσταντίνου.
Για κατέβαμε την ανάποδη,
οι
μπράβο.
ομάδες φοράνε τα κράτη τους, ανεβαίνουν στις μηχανές και ετοιμάζονται.
Κοιτάξτε,
βλέπετε,
είναι σαν να υπάρχει, παιδιά, προετοιμασία πολεμικής επιχείρησης. Κοιτάξτε, εδώ πέρα έχουν αδειάσει τα πάντα.
Εμένα, παιδιά, με συγχωρείτε,
έχουν νεκρώσει τα πάντα.
Με ενοχλεί πάρα πολύ αυτή η εικόνα.
Δείτε εδώ η
δημοκρατία. Πρέπει να διασφαλίζεται το δικαίωμα του καθένα να κυκλοφορεί ελεύθερα και απρόσκοπτα που λένε. Αυτή η εικόνα δεν είναι εικόνα ελεύθερης μετακίνησης πολιτών.
Έτσι είναι. Έχει αδειάσει μισή πόλη, παιδιά. Κοιτάξτε εδώ τι γίνεται.
Πεζοί δεν υπάρχουν, αυτοκίνητα δεν υπάρχουν, μόνο αστυνομικές δυνάμεις παραταγμένες δεξιά και αριστερά.
Μοτοσυκλέτες, οχήματα της αστυνομίας και αστυνομική. Δεν υπάρχει πολίτης. Να, έναν είδαμε.
Και είναι φωτογράφος.
Και αυτός φωτογράφος είναι δικός μας.
Δουλειά κάνει.
Λοιπόν, κοιτάξτε εδώ είναι εικόνα πρωτόγνωρη για τα ελληνικά δεδομένα. Πρωτόγνωρη.
Καπνογόνα, παιδιά.
Πού έχουν ρίξει καπνογόνα?
Μέσα καπνογόνα.
Ναι.
Αν μπορείτε να δείτε, Γιάννη, πλησιάσει προς το κάστεδο, κοντά.
Εντάξει, κάποιος.
Στο βάθος,
Ναι.
Έχει καπνογόνα, όντως.
Ίσως να έχουμε κάποια ένταση στο σημείο εκεί που δείχνεις τώρα, Γιώργο.
Εδώ είναι, παιδί.
Τώρα μόλις πριν λίγα δευτερόλεπτα τα ρίξανε.
Α, μάλιστα. Μήπως το έριξαν κάποιοι άλλοι και έφυγαν.
Θα βγήκαν από τη Ριζάρη, μάλλον, παιδιά, από πάνω.
Ακριβώς.
Το Βασίλειο μέσα από ό,τι βλέπω.
Today, Eamon, is the reaction of the people. Yesterday there was violence in the central square opposite Parliament, but it was, even at its peak, only several hundred protesters, and it didn't really spread beyond the square. When the violence started, most of the demonstrators actually melted away. They didn't want to take part in it. Quite how the anger, though, manifests itself today. There is a general strike on, people aren't at work. Just down the road below me, you can see the queues starting to form. The central square this morning was absolutely quiet, so they started rubbing the graffiti off the walls, and some of the protesters actually have been quite innovative in the way they've managed to get missiles to hurl at the police. They chiselled the marble off the steps of some of the luxury hotels in the square. Now the police yesterday were taking a very laid-back approach. Whether they'll be more heavy-handed today, we'll wait and see.
Yeah. How and why does this affect us? Why should we care what's going on there?
Well, on one level, I suppose we shouldn't. You know, it's the Greek government's debt is held predominantly by Greek banks, which will go bust if it fails to repay it. But unfortunately, there are other countries in the Eurozone that have also lent to Greece and Greece's banks, in France, in Germany, in Italy, and to a smaller extent, the UK, although the UK has been busy insuring, reassuring, and underwriting a lot of the loans that have gone to Greece. So,
half an hour ago, who said he thought that the euro was a likely sell. I continue to make the case that actually aggregate debt for the Eurozone looks quite a whole lot better than it does for the States or Japan or many others. What's your view on how the euro responds to the vote today?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, in aggregate, the budget deficit for Europe as a whole, the current account, the debt to GDP for system as a whole, they are very, very good compared to the other developed countries. So in aggregate, it's very strong. But I think more medium term is a question of political will behind keeping the system intact and making sure that the cross-subsidization actually works to allow the longer-term political dream of integration and ultimately, making sure that the fiscal policies are also integrated. And I think it's a slow, painful road, as we are saying, especially for those who are at the periphery, having to fall into line. And it's all to do with how to become competitive. The unit labor cost in some of these fringe countries went 30–40% out of sync. And it's really, getting back in line to be competitive, to be able to therefore create revenue streams and so on. So painful readjustment, especially in either real wages coming down or, standard of living collapsing quite dramatically. And really, so we're going through these very difficult phases where the population has to sign up to it. Obviously, longer the period that you give for adjustment, 10 years rather than 5 years, easier it is to actually get everybody to sign up and to stay the course. And let's just hope that sanity prevails and the adjustments are not made in a very short period of time. I mean, the IMF made the mistake in Asia of imposing the penalties to be done in a very, very rapid period. And the consequences of those actions that were taken by IMF forcing the Asian countries to do the restructuring so fast is that they're then...
If the plans are voted down, Greece could be bankrupt within weeks. This morning, security's tight around the Parliament, where further demonstrations are expected. From Athens, our Europe correspondent, Alex Rossi.
This is the jeering reception Greek MPs will receive when they turn up to vote. The government needs to force through 28 billion euros in spending cuts to qualify for another instalment of its bailout loan. Without the money, Greece will go bankrupt next month.
The atmosphere here on the streets of Athens is extremely charged. For the past 24 hours, protesters have been chanting thieves at the politicians inside the Parliament building, and that's unlikely to stop until well after the vote. Now, in terms of that vote, George Papandreou, the Greek Prime Minister, has his work cut out for him. He only has a slim majority, 155 of 300 MPs, but already some of them have said they will not support the measure.
But even if the bill passes, making the reforms work will be a challenge when there's widespread resistance, some of it violent. Greece believe more debt is not the answer. Johnny Kyrialis runs a small business. He says the existing cuts have already destroyed the economy and more will simply make things worse.
We have to bankrupt and go back to the drachma, at least we'll go back to zero and restart. We don't have a choice at the moment. worth 350 billion euros in debt. A country of 10 million people being 350 billion in debt can never pay it. We don't produce anything. All we have is sun, tourism, and a few vegetables and olive oil.
There is very little support for more cuts. Most workers believe the EU and IMF plan for recovery is killing the Greek nation. It is a slow death under a mountain of piling debts.
All the money that we borrow goes to the credit that we already have. So all the idea is to pay back the credit. Why should we continue doing this? That's why we're against it.
The money don't go to Greece. They don't go to Greece. Go to the bondholders. The bondholders are not predominantly Greeks.
But there is a bigger issue for the EU. It's feared if Greece goes bankrupt, the financial crisis will infect other bigger European economies, and that could trigger the end of the single currency. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Athens.
Joel Hills, look at those protests. Whatever measures are voted through come midday today, voting is one thing, implementing them may be another.
Yeah, and it remains to be seen how the people react. You heard some of the people in Alex's report there. A good idea. The big problem that Greece has got over and above implementing these tax measures, which will affect absolutely every one person in this country in terms of bringing down the tax thresholds, cutting jobs in the public sector, recruitment freezes, the privatisation of many state-owned assets, unpopular stuff. But there really is no plan B. Plan A, however unpalatable and however unfair, and even the finance minister in Greece has gone on the record as saying this is grotesquely unfair, we feel your pain. However, there's no other plan in town.
Yeah. We see the Parliament there. We hear that inside, members of that Parliament have already begun this debate, the actual vote, as I say, midday today. But what you're saying is we all have a stake in this, no matter what Britain says about not being liable for paybacks, it still affects us in terms of the banking system.
Without question. It's Greek government debt is held by Greek banks, which of course would go bust and fall into the arms of the taxpayer if Greece defaults. But there are banks across the Eurozone and even the United States that have lent money to Greeks, to the Greek economy, to Greek banks. There are companies in the United States and in Britain who have underwritten and guaranteed those loans, who would take a hit in the event that Greece holds up its hands and says, look, we really can't pay. And then there are Eurozone countries who are already close to default, in Portugal, in Ireland, who would suddenly find themselves borrowing at even higher costs. It's more than likely if Greece ends up defaulting. There is a ripple effect, rather like the one that we experienced when Lehman went under in October 2009. And I think there is a threat here to the global financial system. Christine Lagarde, the new IMF chief, has made an appeal to the Greek opposition party this morning, saying, look, this is you're close to disaster. There is a need for national unity. At this stage, there's no sense that that's going to happen. The opposition party is opposed to tax cuts, and I think is representing the popular view. However, the government, the ruling party, does have enough MPs to force this legislation through if it can rely on them to vote in favour.
OK, keep across it for us, Joel. We'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much indeed. Across all our news platforms, we will have that result as it comes in. As I say, we're expecting it around midday today. The debate is already underway inside the Parliament there. So that's online, on television and on your iPad with the Sky News app. What else is happening, Charlotte?
That people don't agree upon are the privatisation plan, because it's not seen as actually realistic and implementable to sell off 50 billion worth of assets in 4 years or 5 years. And of course, the other major nub of disagreement here is the new taxes, because a lot of politicians agree with the people on the streets that too much of a burden has now been spread among the people who are still in work.
Sure.
And it is unfair to ask fewer and fewer people to pay for more and more of the crisis.
Well, we'll see what does happen, and we're keeping a very close eye on events there in Athens, and I'm sure, John, you'll be coming back to give us your analysis of the outcome of certainly that austerity vote. John Soropoulos there in Athens. Thank you.
Thank you.